Hey, anatomy and physiology. We are here today talking about the brain and the meninges, which are protective structures covering the brain. Now, there's tons to know about the brain. In general, we're just getting into the four main regions of it. We're going to be using your study guide, not for this picture, but make sure it's handy. We're also going to be coloring some things, so you might want four different colors to color code the regions of the brain. So don't do anything on this picture, just listen here for a second. We've got four main regions, just want to introduce them to you. So the wrinkly part you think of when you think of the brain, right, is the cerebrum, the thinking, thoughtful parts of your brain. You have then the piece underneath, it's called the cerebellum, tucked up underneath the cerebrum. Then you have the portion that connects the brain to the spinal cord, and that's called the brain stem. There are three parts of the brain stem, so that's why you have three lines here. But everything in green here is the brain stem. And then the part that you're probably not familiar with is this section here. It's called the diencephalon. And the diencephalon is sort of your deep inner part of your brain that controls a lot of innate drives that you might have, some of your emotions, controlling some automatic things like your hormones, but some of that like deep inner brain workings is all there in the diencephalon. All right. Now, this is a picture in your packet. We're not going to do anything with it today, but I did want to show it to you because this is giving you a great external view of the brain. So we can see the outside of the cerebrum here. All these little lines are pointing to different parts of the cerebrum. So like what part does your motor movements or your interpreting what you see or your deep thinking and decision making. Okay, that's what these letters are. And we'll get into that later. You can see the cerebellum and you can see the brain stem. But what you can't see from this image is the inside of the brain, the diencephalon. So instead, we are going to go in your packet to page 4, where we have the cross section of the brain. Now, this is a picture of these exact notes right here. I colored them and tried to color code the notes. It's a little white washed out on my video here, but you can always open up this PowerPoint and look at it, and you could adjust your computer settings so you can see a little bit darker. But I'll tell you what all these colors are, and I'm going to talk about all these parts. If you prefer, you could pause it here and jot everything down that you see, or wait till I go through my descriptions. And jot as you go, and color as you go. All right, so I just cropped out all the other stuff because all those other notes are going to sort of fly in here for you, just maybe a little neater. What I hope that you can see is this section right here, okay, that makes up my cerebrum. I colored it in yellow, right? Not the best color for a white screen, I know. But this I sort of shaded with my colored pencil yellow. Not that part where my cursor is, okay, and not the outer portions. You kind of want to make sure you're coloring in the lines there because we're going to identify some interesting structures later on here. But our cerebrum. I want you to jot down the cerebrum's functions. So it's your motor movement. So Mrs. Lloyd loves to talk with her hands. And that is your motor function, or typing on a keyboard, or texting a friend, or playing basketball. All of that motor function where you control your bodily functions is taken care of by the cerebrum. It also senses the world around you. So visually, what I'm seeing and coming in is being interpreted by my cerebrum. We consider it the part of your brain that's responsible for your intelligence. So your thinking, your decision making, or lack thereof, is there in the cerebrum. And it's the conscious part of the brain. So the things that I'm aware of, I can consciously be aware of my surrounding, and I can consciously control, is all there in the cerebrum. All right, the cerebellum, I colored pink, although it's hard to tell. That's this section right here. It kind of has sort of like these little, I don't know, you can think of it kind of like a bush almost. It looks a little bit like a bush, but that's the cerebellum. And the cerebellum is responsible for your posture, balance, and coordination. If you are an athlete, it is very possible that your cerebellum may be a little bit more fine-tuned than other people's that aren't an athlete. The way these two are easy to mix up because the names are super similar. The way I can always remember cerebellum is my posture and balance is I think of the two L's in cerebellum as my like two legs that I balance on. Cerebellum, I balance on that. Also, like this word like balance has two A's in it. Coordination has two O's in it. I don't know. It helps me remember balance, coordination, cerebellum. There's double L's, two legs that you can stand on. If that works for you, awesome. If not, no worries. All right. Then we have the brain stem. So I colored it green, although it doesn't look super green here. It extends, there's not a clear cut line, but it extends from here down. Don't continue coloring all the way down because this point here, it eventually becomes your spinal cord. So kind of pick a little spot after this little hump to sort of cut it off. That's your brain stem. All right, now your brain stem, it is a lot of the involuntary functions of your body. So your breath rate, just the heart rhythms, regular things that automatically you don't need to think about, your brainstem takes care of. It also connects your brain to the spinal cord. And it's broken up in three main parts. And if you were looking at my picture on the other slide, you can see that I've labeled each of those parts on like the little labels coming off of here. So we have up here at the top, this section right here is the midbrain. So you can follow that line out and draw the midbrain. Then we've got this little bulge right here. It is called the pons. I can remember the pons because when you look at this and I kind of trace it, it kind of looks like a P. Anyways, the pons, this big bulge part of the pons is the P, the bulge of the P. Okay. And then the bottom one, you might have heard this one, it's fun to say, the medulla oblongata. That's this section right here, the medulla oblongata. Maybe you've heard it before because it was mentioned on the Adam Sandler movie Waterboy. It's an older movie. If you haven't seen it, ignore what I'm about to tell you. But they lie about what the part of the brain that controls your fear factor. They say it's the medulla oblongata or anger. I can't remember. It's not. Okay, it does breathing. Like that's it. Okay, nothing cool. Really, the part that would control those emotion centers is right here, your diencephalon, which I colored purple. These are just the three colors I grabbed. So the diencephalon is kind of here in the center. Again, don't color this portion, that's something else. It's not technically a part of it. But you've got these little like bulges, that's a gland. We got another little kind of gland here and a gland here and here. Those are all a part of it. And then this central piece. The midbrain kind of technically sort of wraps around the diencephalon a little bit. It's got an interesting shape to it if you look at it three-dimensionally. I wish we were in the classroom so you could see 3D models of these, but it's kind of this tiny space just shoved right in the middle of the brain. It's almost in the midbrain, which is called the midbrain because it's in the middle of the brain. So the diencephalon is super, super deep in there. That's how I want you to think about it. And your diencephalon, which you're probably not familiar with, it does important things. So as information comes up your spinal cord and through your brainstem, that information hits the diencephalon before it can go and get sent to the cerebrum, your thinking part. So the diencephalon sorts the information coming in. Where does it need to go? You know, is this visual information? Is this a decision? Is this something I'm afraid of? Is this something my hormones need to respond to? It sort of sorts the information wherever it needs to go. It also controls your emotions and a lot of just your general drive. Particularly the thing that does that is the hypothalamus right here. This one doesn't actually have a line coming off of it. I drew a dot and a line out and labeled it the hypothalamus. Okay, it's not either one of these lines above or below it. Those are other things. So the hypothalamus technically is your emotions and drive portion. In the diencephalon also, another drive I'm talking about here is sex drive. Right? That desire, okay, to have sexual feelings for somebody. It's actually way, way, way deep in our brain. And the reason why they say it's so deep in our brain is essentially this drive continues on the species. Dogs who are in heat, she does not, she doesn't got those bits, but they would experience those same kind of drives as well, because they have that deep, deep, deep ingrained part of their brain to control those things. So there's technically 4 parts to the diencephalon. For you guys, I only care that you know 2 of them, the thalamus and the hypothalamus. That prefix hypo means under. So the thalamus is right here, right? And so I drew a dot and a line coming up, and I labeled this thalamus. Excuse me. And then underneath it here is the hypothalamus, coming off hypo underneath, okay, hypothalamus. Now, on your homework assignment for Tuesday, I asked you just to go to this website and just read the web page about the 4 regions. If you did that yesterday, awesome. Skip this part, but if you haven't done it yet, I want you to go to Plan Book and click that link and go learn about the 4 regions. It also takes you to this kind of cool site, Visible Body. If you want to play on it, it lets you kind of twist and turn the brain so you can kind of see it a little bit more 3-dimensionally, especially now when we don't have the 3D models in front of us. This is a good tool and resource for you. Some of your homework assignments will be associated with that. Okay. So on a totally different note, we're still talking the brain here, but your brain needs to be protected. And there's lots of things that protect it, okay? We've got our skin and our scalp, which is actually our first 3 lines here. By the way, we are on page 5, so just flip over from where you were. We're going to label these guys. So we have protective structures, okay? Our blood-brain barrier, we mentioned before, but those glial cells, the neuroglia cells that protect your brain, form part of the blood-brain barrier that keep you safe, but also your bone, our skull, super duper good at keeping it protected. There's fluid surrounding our brain, the cerebrospinal fluid, that keeps our brain safe and secure, and also these things called the meninges. They are these tough protective layers that are in layers that cover the brain. So we're going to go through these layers, okay? So we've got our skin. The periosteum is just that outer slit covering of our bone that ends up forming like tendons and things like that, okay? And then we've got the bone itself. Then we have, before we get into the layers, label a few other things. We have the blood vessels right here because our brain is well nourished with blood vessels. Getting into these meninges, okay? So there are the things on here I'll emphasize. So the dura mater, now some people call it the dura mater. Notice it only has 1 T. This is different from gray matter and white matter that we saw in the spinal cord. There's actually gray and white matter in the brain too. This section right here is gray matter. This section right here is white matter. But this is dura mater, and it is one of these meninges that cover the brain. Right? The outermost one, it's the toughest. It's on the outside, further away from the actual brain tissue we're trying to protect. So this is the cerebrum of our brain right here. Okay. The next layer right here, it's kind of looks sort of web-like, is called the arachnoid matter. And if you are familiar at all, that term arachnoid or arachnophobia means spider. And so this has the name arachnoid mater, because of the little extensions coming off of it that sort of look like spider webs. It's very fibrous, right? Very, very tough, but fibrous. Pretty thin. And then the bottommost layer that's just touching on top of the flesh of my brain, the cerebrum, is called the pia mater. And those are the 3 meninges in order: dura mater, arachnoid mater, pia mater. So if you can remember DAP, from the outside to inside, DAP. That's your meninges in order, outside to inside, DAP. The pia mater is touching the brain or the spinal cord, as we'll see here in a minute. Arachnoid matter has the little spider webs on it, and then the dura. It's technically 2 layers. You don't need to know the difference between the two of them on there. Now, my little picture here is in the way. Now, the arachnoid mater has these areas where these little spider webs extend into. This is called the subarachnoid space, and there is space there, right, where you have the little extensions of the arachnoid mater. And then you've got a subdural space. Okay, the subdural space right here is just underneath the dura mater. So there's these 2 little spaces it's referring to here. The subarachnoid space is more important for you to know for the class. All right, and then the other structures here that aren't uncovered, you don't need to know. Okay, you probably look them up if you're super excited, but I'm not going to go over them with you because that's more information than you need. Okay, so now we're checking out the spinal cord. The spinal cord has the same 3 layers on it that the brain does too. And they go in the same order, DAP from the outermost to innermost. I'm jumping ahead, but so this would be the dura, this is the arachnoid, and then touching it's the pia. But before we jump into that, I'm going to review structures that we've already talked about. So I just drew 3 other lines coming off of this because your textbook can get more complicated, but really all of these together are just pointing to that butterfly shape inside the spinal cord, which we know as the gray matter. And so if this is the gray matter and this is pointing to the not gray space around it is the white matter. There is a tiny little hole that runs down the length of the spinal cord. It's called the central canal. Kind of like the central canal that we had in our bone tissue, but unrelated, just same name. Inside there is cerebral spinal fluid, important fluid that we'll talk about later. And then we've got the nerves branching off of our spinal cord. So this is just a nerve bundle. Lots of different neurons are going to be found within that. But let's see if you can remember from our previous conversation about what kind of root each of these are. So when I looked at it all unexposed, okay, without the covering on it, I can see this one has a bulge. Because that one has a bulge, I know that's got to be the ganglion. And the ganglion is only on, is it dorsal or ventral side? Dorsal root ganglion. Good job. All right. Your dorsal root ganglion is right here. That means this is my dorsal root, right, on the side of the dorsal root ganglion. If this is the dorsal root ganglion, that makes this root the front side, the ventral root. So that's all review, all right? Now, our 3 little meninges in order, all right? Let's DAP it. Dura, mater. Arachnoid, mater. Pia, mater. Outside, middle, touching the spinal cord itself. The P mater is just touching it precisely, just like the Pia mater was touching the cerebrum. Okay? These are protective structures that surround your brain and spinal cord to keep it safe. If you've heard of meningitis, okay, this is inflammation of the meninges, and it's a viral infection that can be deadly, especially to young people. If and when you go to college, they're going to ask you to get your meningitis vaccines. Get them. It's a series, I think, of 2 or 3 shots. But the problem with meningitis, the problem with meningitis is your body, you feel like you have the flu, and then if it's severe enough, you can get hospitalized, you become unconscious, and then you don't wake up from it. And so it's like a flu turned really bad, and it's viral, so the only thing to prevent a virus infection is a vaccine. Make sure you get your meningitis vaccines so you keep your meninges healthy. All right, you guys, that should get you through the homework assignment. I hope you have an awesome day. Bye.